The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. I'm your host, Jenaé, filling in tonight for Vinnie. And the subject of our investigation is the murder of Gary Farris, a prominent attorney, husband, and father. It's a murder mystery that has pitted members of Gary's own family against each other. His wife, Melody, has been accused of the murder, and 3 of her adult children seem to agree with the prosecution's theory that she shot Gary and left his remains in a burn pit to get his money and continue an affair she was having. But this mother's defense is taking aim at her own son, calling him a freeloader and a killer. Here's the story. Melody and Gary Farris were married for 38 years. They lived on a working farm in Alpharetta, Georgia that spanned approximately 10 acres. The couple lived in the main house together, while one of their 4 adult children lived in an apartment above the barn. On July 5th, 2018, deputies with the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office were called to the property for a report of human remains found in a fire. Detectives initially believed Gary could have suffered a medical issue and fallen into the fire, but quickly began investigating this case as a homicide after a bullet was found lodged in one of Gary's rib bones. The bullet, a .38 caliber that didn't match any weapon found during the searches of the property. Further investigation led detectives to Melody, who was arrested and charged with his murder. Now, Melody's trial is underway, and her children have taken the stand. Tonight, our experts will weigh in on the testimony and body language to try and figure out if Melody Farris's demeanor suggests she's guilty of murdering her husband or if there is more to the story. Now, so far, some of the most impactful testimony has come from Gary and Melody's second child, Scott Farris. Not only was Scott the one who discovered his father's remains in that burn pile, but he's also implicated his mother in the crime. And he did that just minutes after authorities arrived on the scene. Let's take a listen to Scott Farris on direct examination when he looked straight at the jury, responding to the question about whether he had anything to do with his father's murder.
Scott, I want you to look at the jury and answer this question. Did you murder your father?
I absolutely did not murder my father. Without a doubt, I loved him.
Look at me. Did you have anything to do to help your mother dispose of and burn your father?
Absolutely not.
Tell me and not me.
No. Like I said, I love my father. He was the backbone. He was the glue to our family.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, it's time to take a break.
Take 15 minutes.
This was a pivotal moment inside of that courtroom. Scott Farris hasn't been charged with anything, but he was questioned and he's been accused by his mother's defense. The prosecutor in this moment asked Scott to turn his body, look into the eyes of the men and women who are going to be determining his mother's fate. So we're focusing on how this son fared on the stand with our behavioral experts. And here's our first question in this show's investigation. We're taking a look at Scott Farris and what his body language reveals in his testimony. Let's bring in our experts who can help us answer this question. Joining us, body language expert and author Rodney Smith, and also joining me, forensic psychologist with more than 20 years of experience assessing and treating mental health disorders, Dr. Leslie Dobson is with us. Thank you both for being with us. Rodney, let me start with you. That no from this witness on the stand where he said absolutely no, without a doubt, I did not kill my father. What is his body language saying to you?
Well, as he looks towards the jury, one of the first things we see is the wrinkling and the furrowing of the brow. There's a bit of this eye flash, which shows that I'm about to say something and I'm trying to ensure that I catch your interest in what I'm about to say, because I need you to pay attention to what I'm saying. He leans in, he's becoming engaged. We see this emotional, I would say, some type of expression that shows that I'm taking this to the heart. I actually was not able to see it at the moment. He appears to give a deep swallow, but I'm not able to fully interpret whether or not he actually did that to see, because when we look for consistency or congruency, we're trying to find out if the words actually match with the characteristics of behavior that he is actually displaying. One of the biggest things that I did find interesting was, instead of just saying no, he says absolutely not. And that is used in a lot of times as a qualifier. I need you to understand that without any type of equivocation, I had no parts of this. But then he also says, I did not. So he's trying to break this down. We've heard this in terms before with former presidents. I did not do this. I am not this. We see a loss of contractions. Instead of saying, I didn't do this, he broke this down and said, I did not. Unfortunately, with just this short of a clip, I don't have an accurate level of a baseline to be able to see a lot of deviation in what he actually displayed at that moment, just for that one clip.
Oh, we're going to watch a lot more, so hang on. And Dr. Dobson, I want to first get your reaction. What do you think? What did you notice about this denial from Scott on the stand while he's on direct? So these are the questions that he can anticipate.
I found it odd. So we're looking at somebody who's dealt with a childhood of trauma and chaos, yet he seems heavily coached and he doesn't seem natural in his response. It doesn't appear consistent and linear as you would if you had a history of trauma and your father was just murdered. So I question where he's coming from, if it is coaching or if he has some knowledge of how this murder played out and he is trying to build reasonable doubt in the jury.
Well, let's take a listen to the portion of his testimony, which would be a bit more difficult to be coached for because he wouldn't have been prepped on these exact questions. But he made a similar denial this time when he was on cross-examination by his mother's attorney.
You used that .357 to shoot your father, did you not?
No, because I never shot my father.
And that .357, I don't know where it is, but you went to Lake Lanier the day after you shot your father, did you not? You went to the lake, yes?
Yes, we went to the lake after playing golf.
Did you throw that .357 into Lake Lanier after you shot your father?
No, because I have not seen that .357 since 2012, I think it was, when my house was broken into.
And did your father, in fact, confront you that evening about being out again? Because through the text messages, we clearly have seen that you're constantly hiding from your father to go play golf, to go hang with your friends and not do your job. And he was always controlling your money, yes?
No, he wasn't controlling my money.
Did you shoot him at the barn, Scott?
I never shot my father.
Did you take that bullet and put that bullet in the floor in your mother's house?
I never knew of that bullet.
Rodney, I'm no body language expert, but I'm noticing his eyes moving a lot in that clip. What does that say in your expert opinion?
So as in neurolinguistic programming, we look for eye accessing cues which can show whether or not you're trying to construct something or if you're actually doing a lot of recall, whether that be an auditory version or as far as something that was visually remembered. So without having the opportunity to directly baseline where he would be, it does show if accessing him in a level of the general population, it would show that he's accessing a cortex that could be constructing. We do see certain areas of disgust, and I've seen some areas where the nose is wrinkling, where it shows that he is not happy with the questions that was being presented to him in regard to the weapon. Also, there's one portion in here where he starts to lick his lips, which shows that the adrenaline level is high. That fight, flight, or freeze level is actually getting higher and higher, where the body is starting to draw out. And directly after he licks his lips, you'll start to see, if you pay attention to the areas where his beard is on his cheeks, you'll see a bit of a jaw clench, which shows some of the frustration. And then lastly, on the last question that was asked of him, instead of, I noticed, I can't recall exactly what the question was, but it was a yes or no. It required a yes or no answer, and he did not give a yes or no response.
Dr. Dobson, he's in a difficult spot. Not only is he a victim because it's his father who was killed in this case, but his mother is the one who's on trial, and her attorney, so essentially it can seem that she is the one who is accusing him of this murder. Authorities don't agree with that. But are you picking up on anything from him in this position of being a potential suspect, according to the defense, but also a victim who wants justice for his father?
I think, just like Rodney was saying, is he looks defensive. He's surprised by the questions. He becomes more and more guarded. But what struck me is how he has ambiguous answers, and then he quickly has very specific answers, such as the date he last remembers having the weapon. So again, we're looking at that consistency of behavior, and it's not there. In trauma, we find consistency in emotions. That's how we gain our normative samples in our scientific studies. And he's kind of all over the map with this. It lends me to think he's not telling the entire truth.
And that weapon you mentioned, that's so important to this case because he claims he lost it in 2012, but authorities say he had ammunition that matched the gun that was used to kill his father. We have more to talk about when it comes to Scott Farris on the stand. Our guests are staying with us. Coming up next, what can we learn from Melody, the mother's reactions to her son on the stand?
It just came across me many a times because of my size and the size of my father. Yes, I was going to be looked at like that, but I had nothing to do with it.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
I was trying to help find out what happened to my father.
Earlier, you stated that your mother, in the year following this, I mean, she was trying to constantly make things up about you. Have you arrested or something to that effect? But isn't it true that you called 911 multiple times on your mother that year? You remember that? I have the recordings if you'd like to listen to them.
I do not remember calling 911 on her. I know there's a couple times I've had to call 911.
That moment was just one of many that we watched during Scott's testimony, where his mother, Melody Farris, appeared to become emotional, more so than the stoic person that we've seen generally throughout this trial. Let's take a look at another moment. Melody is visibly at this point crying as Scott explains his theory of the crime against his father.
You even said so in your own interviews that she would have had to have had help. Didn't you say that?
There's a possibility, a chance of that, you know, she could have needed help. But, you know, yes, it just came across me many a times because of my size and the size of my father. Yes, I was going to be looked at like that, but I had nothing to do with it. But I've also seen, you know, you always see people on the news being able to do stuff under, you know, how would you say it, when their adrenaline's rushing and stuff. They're able to do things that they thought they'll never be able to do.
Well, Scott, you would agree. I'm asking, this is my question, and I'll sit down. It's your proposal to this jury that something that's strange and odd on the news about these stories of adrenaline and picking up cars and all these very odd things. That would be somehow how your mother pulled off moving a 300-pound man in the house instead of the very obvious solution, which is that the one person on the property who could move him did move him, and that's you. That's all I have.
Watching this emotional reaction to Scott's testimony through our cameras, we also know that the jury saw this same response. So it brings us to our next question in this investigation. What can we learn from Melody's reactions? They're inside of the courtroom, seeing all of this from her own son on the stand. Let's bring back in our guests who are still with us. Body language expert Rodney Smith and forensic psychologist Dr. Leslie Dobson. Dr. Leslie, let me start with you. This is a mother and a son, and we're seeing her break down there as her son is the one that she's accusing, but now he's accusing her in his testimony.
Right. It's incredibly sad. All of this is incredibly sad, but it's not consistent. She has been so stoic and unemotional throughout the trial, and now for some reason she's crying. And at the same time, he appears to be a little bit caught up. He's not answering the questions that are asked of him. He's defensive, and I almost feel like maybe he's a bit cornered and she's aware.
Dr. Rodney Smith, let me ask you about what you're seeing in her reaction. Anything standing out to you in terms of body language? Because we know the jury is watching this.
So we actually see the furrowed brow. We see her covering her mouth. She's taken this pose as though she is attentively listening. We see a lot more blinking from her as opposed to what we've seen throughout the entirety of her sitting here in this trial. I think that whatever has triggered her is definitely showing the change in the baseline, because for her to be able to be this expressive in her emotions, there has been definitely something that has been seen, heard, or interpreted in her own way that would cause her to shift. Because we noticed that her hand is actually resting on the side of her cheek. She's taken more of a lean towards her left side in her chair, whereas opposed to how she was actually sitting pretty much for the duration of this, as she's been covering her mouth and more so leaning forward. So obviously in certain areas of questioning, we look for what happened before the question, during the question, and after the question that would cause or change the shift. And I believe based off of certain things that she has heard him say, that is what's causing the change in her baseline, as it could be either disbelief, it could be, I can't believe that he's saying this, because he even made a response that says, I didn't kill him. And oftentimes, or I don't remember if he said, I didn't kill him or I didn't do it. But oftentimes we don't tell people what we didn't do. We tell people what we did do. But he is trying to definitely come across and show clarity that he wants to disassociate himself from having any parts of this.
Rodney, a quick follow-up to what you just mentioned. Does it appear natural to you? Because we know the jury's trying to make a determination when they see her emotion. Is it something that you think will come off to them as staged, or something that's just her even trying to hold back emotions, but it breaking through?
I think with the continuance of seeing her, it appears that she did have a little bit of a runny nose. Her eyes do show some watering. Not everyone will cry and show emotions exactly the same, but that in conjunction with that furrowed brow and the change in the shift of her baseline behavior, I would say that what I'm seeing here is being expressed as being authentic and congruent with her behavior.
So, Dr. Dobson, we've got a son on the stand who was interviewed by police. He hasn't been charged at all with his father's death, but he certainly was checked into, sat down with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and they conducted a polygraph test. The jury is not going to hear about that polygraph, especially because he failed it. The defense wants to bring that in. They wanted to show that there were some issues there. Can you talk about, from a mental health disorder and from a psychology standpoint, what are some of the reasons or indicators why someone may fail a polygraph test, even though we know it's not admissible in court?
So a polygraph isn't going to read your mind, but it is going to look for consistency and inconsistency in your answers. And initially, a polygraph is going to set a baseline. So it's going to ask you simple questions like, do you like blue? Do you like cars? Yes or no answers, where we can kind of gauge, okay, when you're telling the truth, this is how you are. When you're lying, this is how you are. So if he didn't pass that, then they asked him some hard questions that led to some change in his physiology that triggered this test to falsify his answers.
Now, you mentioned, Dr. Dobson, about inconsistency with his answers. Do you think that that may just be something that is difficult for him and could be the reason that he failed this test?
I think it's quite possible, but again, that would be consistent, right? He would consistently show difficulty with answering these questions. Instead, he's all over the map. He looks defensive. He's overly forward. He's posturing towards the jury before he actually speaks. The lawyer is directing him in what to say, to look at the lawyer than to look at the jury. So he's confusing his answers, which could be the reason for the inconsistencies we're seeing. And it could also be the legal coaching that he's receiving as well.
Sure. Rodney, real quick before we have to go to a break, Melody's reactions, based on what you've seen, if you were a jury consultant for this team, would you say that she should take the stand?
At this point, right now, it's always you're taking a very risky chance anytime you're trying to get on the stand and defend yourself, because you just don't know what questions are going to be asked. They're going to bring up things that are part of your past, present, and so on and so forth. They're going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and indifferent. And so I would say it's very risky, because throughout the trial, it looks like her demeanor is very callous.
Rodney, we are out of time. Thank you to our guests. I'm Julia Jenaé. We're going to keep digging for answers as this investigation continues. I'm Julia Jenaé, in for Vinnie Politan. Our investigation is digging into the murder case against Melody Farris. She's a wife and a mother of 4, and she's accused of murdering her longtime husband, Gary Farris. It started out as a straightforward case, but since her trial began, it's become an all-out family feud with blood relatives pointing the finger at one another. Here's the story. From the outside, Gary Farris seemed to have it all. He was a successful, high-profile attorney in Atlanta, Georgia. He had a sprawling estate, a wife of nearly 4 decades, and 4 adult children the pair had raised together. On paper, it was a great life, but not everything was as it seemed. Gary and his wife Melody had been living separate lives in their mansion for years, sometimes going days without seeing each other. Melody had also begun an affair, something that was no secret to the rest of the family. So when Gary was found dead in their backyard burn pile and a bullet found lodged in his ribs, Melody seemed like the obvious suspect. She was later charged with murder and eventually took her seat at the defendant's table in the courtroom. It was then the case became far muddier than the prosecution would have hoped. As more details were revealed, it became clear the defense would be pointing the finger at Gary's adult sons who share the same motive alleged to be Melody's, Gary's money. So, as Gary's kids take the stand attempting to implicate their own mother, our experts join us to tell us who they believe is really telling the truth in this whodunit case. The dynamic of this trial changed drastically once the first of Gary and Melody's kids took the stand in the state's case, and that's Chris Farris. His testimony on direct examination ended with a pivotal moment, one that's likely going to weigh on the minds of the jury. He denied any involvement in his father's death. Let's watch.
He told me that he was very depressed, and he said that each day with my mother was pretty much the worst day of his life versus the day before. Like every day was the worst day of his life.
Chris, did you have anything to do with the murder of your father?
No.
So it was a direct answer to the question, a simple no, that if he believed that could lead to Melody's incarceration, rather. But the question that we're asking is whether Chris Farris will be found trustworthy by this jury. So let's take a look at our next question for our experts who are going to weigh in. Is Chris a believable witness? He's someone that the defense has hinted at potentially having something to do with this case. He has an alibi. Let's bring in our experts who are joining us. Body language expert and author Rodney Smith is with us. Also joining us, forensic psychologist with more than 20 years of experience assessing and treating mental health disorders, Dr. Leslie Dobson is with us. Dr. Leslie, let's talk about Chris Farris, his testimony on the stand. It's pivotal to the state's case. Your thoughts on just what you know so far about Chris Farris?
My initial thoughts are that he's more likable than his brother. His answers appear a little more honest, although they are a bit quick for if somebody asked me if I had killed my father. So they are a bit staged. I would be cautious as a juror, but again, I would believe him more than the other people we've seen in this case so far.
Rodney Scott, of course, is the one that the defense is really taking aim at. They have named him when they are pointing out, hey, this is who we think is the alternate suspect in this case. Chris, not as direct in terms of what the defense is saying or accusing, but your thoughts on his testimony. These two brothers look similar, but Chris is the oldest.
Yes, right now, from the clip that we've seen, the second brother here, he looks a little bit more calm, cool, and collective. He's very calculated and precise with his answers, and he doesn't show that he's under high levels of stress, as the previous brother was at the beginning. I think that as questioning will become a bit more difficult, we may see different type of reactions, but I also if I will, I'm also a polygraph examiner, and what I wanted to piggyback on for the first brother is one of the reasons why an individual would potentially fail a polygraph is you're asked control questions and you're asked relevant questions during a polygraph test. And those relevant questions are questions that are directly related to the crime. The control questions are questions that are similar to the crime in nature, but not directly related. And what happens is when those relevant questions outweigh the results of the control questions, that will come across as being deceptive, which will constitute a fail. It doesn't necessarily mean that he did the murder, but he could also have guilty knowledge or information that is causing him to have those reactions during the exam.
And that's the reason the state worked very hard to keep that out from in front of this jury. The judge agreed polygraphs are not admissible. This would be in the case of Scott. But turning our attention back to Chris Farris, on cross-examination, he was asked about this strange situation where the defense says, if your mother did these things, why would she have then, on that same day, invited over the grandchildren, Chris's children? Let's watch.
Your mom called you.
Mm-hmm.
What'd she say?
Like I said before, she said, hey, does Addie still want to come have the sleepover at the farm?
Don't you think it's a little absurd to think that if your mother gruesomely killed your father and burned him on a burn pile, that she would invite your daughter up to her house? Her granddaughter, whom she loved more than anything.
I think it's sick and twisted.
So you think, is that what you think?
Yeah.
Dr. Dobson, I'll bring you back in. First of all, is it absurd to think that a grandmother would invite over children if she had just killed their grandfather on that property? And what do you think of Chris and the way that he responded about his own mother?
I think for you and I, as people who haven't committed a murder, it might be absurd. But if somebody commits a murder and they are that thoughtful in their action, I think it falls in line with trying to hide your crime. And it's not surprising at all. His reaction, I thought, was quite genuine, more than some of his other reactions and responses. He just flat out said, this is really weird.
Rodney, your thoughts?
I concur with my colleague as he said. I think it's sick and twisted, and I absolutely agree with that statement. For someone to do something of that caliber after they have committed some type of heinous criminal act as such, I would most certainly agree with what the brother said. He was, as I said, he's maintaining this level of clear, concise behavior. We did see his eyes go down, and which would be to our right, which is down to his left, and in neurolinguistic, in the NLP, that would be consistent with that of internal dialogue, him speaking to himself and getting his thoughts calculated before he actually makes a statement.
Okay. One of the added elements of Chris's testimony is that he struggled with jobs. There were times that he had some rifts with his father when it came to money. His father, Gary Farris, was a highly successful attorney, and Chris was asked about whether or not they had money issues and whether or not he ever took money from his father. Of course, that's one of the motives they say that exists for Melody. Let's take a listen to what happened during his lengthy cross-examination.
He sends you this message that says, what?
Your stealing money is out of control. I will change my accounts tomorrow.
Okay, so what happened there? Did you ever talk to him on the phone about that or anything else?
I don't remember. I never talked to him on the phone about it.
What did you do? I mean, if my dad accused me of stealing money, I think I'd be shocked.
Well, my dad, he could cut pretty deep with his words, when he was upset with me.
All right, so what did you do?
I don't remember.
Mr. Frankish asked you a question about the finances and your father passing. And I believe you said his kids would financially gain if he died.
Well, I mean, it's just a matter of fact. If your parents pass away, the money, like I have a will too. I have if something was to happen to me, my kids would, get what I have. I have life insurance with both of my daughters' names on it.
I believe you said that they would be you would be better off financially.
I don't remember saying that,
but you would be financially better off.
If what?
If you were to get the estate in this case, because it's still held up,
like
correct?
Right now?
Like nothing, nothing's been able to access because, of course, this case is going on.
Yeah. No, I mean, nothing's been accessed at all.
Right.
So, I mean, So
you would financially benefit if your mother is convicted of murder.
I guess you could say that.
Dr. Dobson, is the discussion about money making him squirm, in your opinion?
Actually, no. I mean, it's hard for me to take my eyes off his mother because she was showing some different mannerisms during his statement. But no, I found him quite genuine, and he wasn't guarded, and he did say life would be easier if his mom went to prison and he got the money.
Oh, tell me what you noticed about his mother. We've seen her cry during certain moments on the stand, but what do you think she is emoting when the situation of money comes up?
I would have to really defer to our colleague here, but I was getting this feeling of disgust with her eyes darting back and moving and her eyebrows moving and her hand was moved away from her mouth. So she had this more disdain for his defense, which it lends me to think that he was more genuine and it was putting her more in that corner of guilty.
Rodney, weigh in on the reaction from mom.
Yeah, so the mom has this, as we said, this stoic appearance about her as to though she's just got this stone look about her. We don't see much of a change throughout anybody's testimony, except she's just given these looks of intent. There's not much eye blinkage, which shows that she is showing high intent and high focus of concentration on paying attention to what they're saying. One thing that I noticed about Chris is this while he has a lot of logic and he puts time and thought into his answers before he opens his mouth, this topic of money appears to be a very touchy subject. We see the corner pull of his mouth on his left side where it comes back. It's asymmetrical, which is a sign of contempt. And we know that anytime that there's contempt, there's some type of disdain in that statement. There are a couple of answers that he gives where there's uncertainty in his answer, as we see a bit of a shoulder shrug as to, I don't know exactly what to say. I don't have the exact words, but this is what I can come up with that is related as best as possible.
And if we're paying attention to it, we know the jury's paying attention to it as well. We have to get to a break, but Gary's sons were not the only children to take the stand. Still to come, what does their sister's body language reveal?
The next call I got was from Chris. And he said he's gone.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
Yes, I did receive confirmation later that my dad had been shot, and that was pretty much the sticking point for me. When I heard that, I thought, I mean, it just confirmed my beliefs.
Similar to her brothers, Scott and Chris, Emily Farris took the stand and made it known that she believes that her mother was responsible for her father's murder. But will the jury find her credible? Let's go back to a key moment in her testimony. She's describing finding out that her father, Gary Farris, was dead.
And then who did you hear from next? I think it was Chris. I mean, he would keep calling just to let me know. And I think I even said to him, call local hospitals, call, maybe he went to the ER or something. But I know that when I first got word that he was missing, I called my dad, and it went to voicemail. And I don't know if I texted him, but I did send him an email to his personal email and his work email saying, we're trying to find you. Where are you? Please call me back. It was very brief, something to just be hey, if you get this, call me. And then the next call I got was from Chris. And he said he's gone. I said, what do you mean he's gone? What are you talking about? And he said, Emily, he's gone. I was where did he go? He said, no, he's gone. He is gone. He's we think he's in the burn pile. And that's just kind of when it went, I just lost it. I just said, I'm coming. I'm on my way. And then I think I talked to my sister, Amanda, and she was very upset. And I just said, I'm on my way. I'll be there as soon as I can.
It's clear that Emily was highly emotional on the stand. This is an emotional case, emotional for this family. The question is, did this jury find those emotions to be genuine? And even if they were genuine, does it suggest truth-telling? So that brings us to our final question in our investigation. What does Emily's body language reveal to this jury that's watching everything unfolding in this courtroom? Let's bring back in our guests. Still with us, body language expert Rodney Smith and forensic psychologist Dr. Leslie Dobson. Rodney, what do you think about the emotion and whether it's genuine from Emily Farris?
Well, as she's talking, once again, as I say, when it comes down to body language, we look at the words, the body language, and whether or not they're all congruent. And just as we start to see this emotion, we see her looking up, showing that she's visually recalling or remembering some information. And then we also see a nasal flare. Her nostrils get really big. She takes a deep swallow, and then she has a change in the pitch of her voice. She says, and then he says, her voice gets a lot lighter, and she also covers her facial areas, which is a form of self-soothing. She breaks eye contact, she covers herself, and she starts touching. And typically in high levels of stress, especially in areas of disbelief, the hands move higher up on the face as well as on the brow area or either on the top of the head. One of the most interesting things that I also noticed was when they did the side-by-side with the mother, I could tell that the mother also had a response of sadness as well. And we could see that this affected her. And from my observation, I would say that it ails the mother to see her daughter feeling some type of way and showing that sadness. So it does show at some point that the mom does have some level of, I would say maybe empathy would be the correct word to use.
Dr. Dobson, we heard Emily testify about finances creating a strain with her mother and her mother's cheating multiple times during her marriage to her father. They were not divorced, they lived on separate floors. But can you talk about the impact of a strained marital relationship on children, and these being adult children?
Well, it seems like these children didn't really know how to place their parents, and if they were very focused on the financial aspect, this can be very surprising to the family. But I do see this genuine connection from the mother, that empathy that Rodney mentioned, to the daughter. And money wasn't a part of that moment in trial, right? That was a real connection, and that was very, very sad. But it does seem like the daughter is taking a side with her brothers and appears very genuine in doing so.
Yeah, we expect there's one daughter left who is on the side of Melody Farris, so 3 against 1. Rodney, any more that you can talk about Melody's reaction to her daughter, because she was getting emotional, but it seemed different than how she was with her sons.
I would think that there's probably some type of mother-daughter connection that is probably a lot more significant than that of her with her sons. As I said, anytime we see shifts and changes in baseline, we want to look at what happened, what was either happening or being said prior to the statement, during the statement, or directly after the statement, to be able to see what that trigger or what that changing or altering moment was. And apparently, like I said, based off of the mother's reactions, even though she had her hand covering her mouth, we could see levels of frowning and furrowing in the brow of sadness, which shows that this was affecting her to see her daughter hurt in such a way as she recalled that incident.
Yeah, this is a riveting case. To have children on the stand who are in this complicated situation, and it remains a murder mystery. In the beginning, this case didn't seem very complex at all. A wealthy husband is murdered at his home, and his affair-having wife has become the obvious suspect. But as time goes on, more and more holes have been poked in that theory. If they had been living separate lives for decades, why did this happen now? Why go through the effort of killing him now? And if Melody Farris had killed him, how could she have moved such a large body by herself? It's a case that comes down to the testimony of the adult children, and did they seem credible? Will the jury believe them? Our experts have weighed in, and that's all the time that we have for, and the jury will be doing the same soon. Our thanks to our experts. I'm Julia Jenaé. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.